Picture this for a second. You're at a social gathering, maybe a friend's party or a casual meetup at a downtown bar. Across the room, you notice her, someone who instantly catches your attention. But here's what separates the average guy from the man who leaves a lasting impression. The average guy walks over, delivers some rehearsed line, tries to impress her with his job title or his car, and within minutes, she's politely excusing herself to find her friends. But the other man, the one who understands what I'm about to share with you, does something completely different. He creates a moment so powerful, so psychologically compelling, that hours later, days later, even weeks later, she finds herself thinking about him when she least expects it. Her mind wanders back to that interaction, replaying it, analyzing it, fantasizing about what could happen next. And the most fascinating part? He didn't use any tricks, any manipulative tactics, or any of those outdated pickup artist techniques that flood the internet. What he did was tap into something far more profound: the psychological triggers that create genuine, unshakable attraction. You see, after studying the works of Robert Greene, particularly his insights on seduction and power dynamics, combined with the Stoic principles of Marcus Aurelius and modern psychological research on attraction, I've discovered that making a woman fantasize about you isn't about what you say or how you look. It's about creating a specific emotional experience that her mind simply cannot let go of. Think about it this way. When was the last time you couldn't stop thinking about someone? It wasn't because they gave you their resume or tried to logically convince you they were worth your time. It was because they sparked something inside you, something that your rational mind couldn't quite explain, but your emotional mind couldn't ignore. The foundation of this approach lies in understanding a fundamental truth that most men completely miss. Women don't fantasize about the guy who's always available, always texting, always trying to prove his worth. They fantasize about the man who creates what psychologists call an open loop in their mind, an unfinished story that their imagination can't help but complete. This concept goes back to the Zygarnik effect, discovered by Russian psychologist Bluma Zygarnik, which shows that our brains are literally wired to remember and obsess over incomplete tasks or experiences far more than completed ones. When you understand how to ethically apply this principle to your interactions, you become the kind of man that women can't stop thinking about, not because you're playing games, but because you're creating genuine intrigue and emotional depth. Let me paint you a clearer picture of how this works in real life. Imagine you're having a conversation with an attractive woman. Most guys would try to tell her everything about themselves, desperately attempting to showcase their value like a salesman pitching a product. But the man who understands these principles does something counterintuitive. He shares just enough to pique her interest, then skillfully redirects the conversation back to her. He might mention traveling to an exotic location, but instead of launching into a 20-minute monologue about his trip, he simply says something like, "The sunrise over the mountains in Peru changed my perspective on life," and then genuinely asks her about a moment that shifted her worldview. This does two powerful things simultaneously. First, it creates mystery. She's now curious about his experience, but doesn't have all the details. Second, it shows emotional intelligence and depth, without explicitly stating it. This approach aligns perfectly with what Giacomo Casanova, history's most renowned seducer, understood centuries ago. In his memoirs, he revealed that his greatest power wasn't his looks or his wealth. It was his ability to make women feel like they were the most fascinating person in the world while maintaining an air of mystery about himself. Modern research in neuroscience supports this. When we experience something mysterious or intriguing, our brains release dopamine, the same chemical associated with pleasure and addiction. By being selectively mysterious, not fake or manipulative, but genuinely holding back certain aspects of yourself, you create a dopamine response that literally makes her brain crave more interaction with you. But here's where most men get it wrong. They think being mysterious means being cold, distant, or playing hard to get. That's not what we're talking about here. True mystery, the kind that creates lasting attraction, comes from depth and authenticity. It's about having such a rich inner life, such interesting experiences and perspectives, that you couldn't possibly share everything in one conversation, even if you wanted to. This is where the Stoic philosophy becomes invaluable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. When you cultivate this inner richness, When you become genuinely content and fascinated with your own journey, you naturally become mysterious because you're not desperately trying to download your entire personality onto someone else in the first meeting. The second crucial element that makes women fantasize about you is what I call emotional range with control. Most men operate in one of two modes when trying to attract women. They're either trying to be the ultra-logical, successful guy who never shows emotion, or they're the overly emotional guy who dumps all his feelings out like an overflowing garbage can. Neither of these creates the fantasy effect we're after. What does create it is showing that you have deep emotions and passions, but you're in complete control of them. This is pure stoicism in action. Seneca said, "Every new thing excites the mind, but a mind that seeks truth turns from the new to the old and finds peace." When you can discuss something you're passionate about, whether it's music, philosophy, adventure, or any pursuit, with genuine enthusiasm but without neediness or desperation for validation, you create an incredibly attractive energy. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're talking about your love for rock climbing. The average guy might either downplay it, saying, "Yeah, I climb sometimes, it's cool," trying to seem nonchalant, or he might go overboard, talking for 30 minutes about every climb he's ever done. But the man who understands emotional range with control might say something like, "There's this moment when you're hanging on the cliff face 300 feet up where everything else disappears. It's just you, the rock, and this profound silence. It's the closest I've come to meditation in motion." Then he pauses, lets that land, and shifts focus back to her. What's something that makes you feel completely present like that? This shows passion, depth, and emotional intelligence while maintaining control and mystery. This brings us to the third element, which Robert Greene calls selective vulnerability. In his book, The Art of Seduction, Greene explains that showing strategic moments of vulnerability creates an irresistible pull because it makes you human and relatable while still maintaining your strength. The key word here is selective. You're not trauma dumping or seeking emotional validation. Instead, you're showing that you're secure enough to acknowledge your humanity. For instance, instead of saying, "I've been hurt before and I have trust issues," which positions you as damaged and needy, you might share, "I used to think vulnerability was weakness. It took me years to realize that the strongest thing you can do is remain open after life has given you every reason to close off. That shift changed everything for me." This shows emotional depth, growth, and strength all at once. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful yet misunderstood concepts in creating lasting attraction, the push-pull dynamic. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about creating a natural rhythm of connection and space that mirrors the way all energy moves in nature. Think about ocean waves. They rush toward the shore with intensity, then pull back, creating a mesmerizing rhythm that we can watch for hours. Your interactions should have this same quality. You create moments of intense connection, deep eye contact, engaging conversation, genuine interest. Then you naturally create space. This might be excusing yourself to talk to other people at a social gathering, ending a text conversation at a high point instead of letting it dwindle, or simply being comfortable with moments of silence. This dynamic serves multiple psychological purposes. First, it prevents habituation. The psychological principle where we stop noticing things that are constantly present. When you're always available, always responding immediately, always trying to maintain connection, you become background noise in her life. But when you create natural rhythms of presence and absence, each interaction maintains its impact. Second, it allows her imagination to fill in the gaps. During the space you create, her mind naturally wanders to thoughts of you, wondering what you're doing, replaying your conversations, imagining future interactions. This is where the fantasy element truly takes hold. The fourth element I want to share with you is what I call predictable unpredictability. This sounds like a contradiction, but it's actually one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal. You want to be predictable in your core values, your integrity, and your masculine presence. She should never question whether you're a solid, trustworthy man. But within that framework of reliability, you want to be delightfully unpredictable in your actions, your date ideas, your conversation topics, and your expressions of interest. This combination creates what neuroscientists call intermittent reinforcement, which is the most powerful mechanism for creating psychological attachment. Here's how this might look in practice. You establish a pattern of texting her every few days, but the content and timing are varied. Sometimes it's a thoughtful question in the morning. Sometimes it's a funny observation late at night. Sometimes it's a voice note, sometimes a photo from your day. You're consistent in showing interest, but inconsistent in how that interest manifests. For dates, instead of the predictable dinner and drinks routine, you might suggest watching the sunrise from a rooftop, attending an underground jazz session, or teaching her something you're skilled at. The key is that each interaction should feel fresh and slightly unexpected, while still being grounded in your authentic interests and personality. Now, I want to address something crucial that separates the men who create lasting attraction from those who might create initial interest but can't maintain it. It's the concept of grounded masculinity, which combines the best insights from both ancient Stoicism and modern psychology. Too many men think that being attractive to women means becoming someone they're not, either the bad boy, the ultra-successful businessman, or whatever archetype they think women want. But true, lasting attraction comes from being unapologetically yourself while continuously growing and improving. This doesn't mean just be yourself in the way that phrase is usually thrown around as useless advice. It means understanding your core values, your mission in life, your authentic interests and passions, and then expressing these with confidence and without apology. This grounded masculinity manifests in subtle but powerful ways. It's in how you hold eye contact without being creepy or aggressive, steady, warm, and unafraid. It's in how you speak, clearly, with purpose, without rushing or seeking approval after every statement. It's in how you handle her tests, because yes, whether consciously or unconsciously, women will test your frame. When she throws out a challenging comment or seems to pull back, the grounded man doesn't panic, doesn't over-explain, doesn't chase. He remains centered, perhaps with a slight smile that shows he's unshaken, and continues being his authentic self. Let me share a personal story that illustrates this perfectly. I was at an art gallery opening, engaged in a fascinating conversation with a woman about the intersection of technology and creativity. We were clearly connecting, the energy was electric, and then she suddenly said, "You're probably one of those guys who has a different woman every week." Now, the average guy would either defensively protest, trying to convince her he's not a player, or he'd lean into it, trying to seem more desirable by implying he has options. But understanding these principles, I simply smiled, paused for a moment, and said, "I'm selective about who I spend my time with. Quality over quantity has always been my approach to life." Then I seamlessly returned to our conversation about art. This response showed confidence without arrogance, addressed her concern without being defensive, and maintained the frame of a man who knows his worth. This brings us to a critical point about creating the fantasy effect. You must master the art of leaving conversations and interactions at high points. This is perhaps one of the hardest things for men to do, because when things are going well, our instinct is to ride that wave as long as possible. But think about your favorite TV shows or books. They always end chapters or episodes at moments of high tension or interest, leaving you desperately wanting more. This is exactly what you want to create in your interactions. When the conversation is at its peak, when she's laughing, engaged, and clearly enjoying herself, that's precisely when you should consider gracefully exiting. Now let's dive into advanced territory, the concept of emotional leadership. This is where you guide the emotional tone and depth of your interactions without being controlling or manipulative. Women are naturally attracted to men who can lead them through a range of emotional experiences, from laughter to depth, from lightness to intensity. This doesn't mean you're responsible for her emotions or that you're trying to manipulate how she feels. Instead, you're creating a space where various emotions can be safely explored and expressed. Here's how this works in practice. You might start a conversation with playful banter, creating a fun, light energy. Then, through your questions and observations, you gradually guide the conversation to deeper territory. You might ask about her dreams, her fears, what drives her, what makes her feel most alive. But you don't do this like an interviewer checking boxes. You share your own perspectives, create connections between ideas, and show genuine curiosity about her inner world. Then, just when things might get too heavy, you know how to shift back to lightness, perhaps with a well-timed joke or playful observation. Let me share another concept that will revolutionize how you create lasting attraction: the power of implied value versus stated value. Most men try to attract women by stating their value directly. They talk about their job, their car, their achievements, their travel experiences. While these things might be impressive, stating them directly often has the opposite effect of what's intended. It comes across as try hard, as seeking validation, as needing her to be impressed. But when you imply your value through your behavior, your standards, your conversation topics, and your lifestyle, it hits completely differently. For example, instead of saying, "I have a successful business," you might casually mention a challenge you're working through that implies business ownership. Instead of saying, "I travel a lot," you might reference a conversation you had with a local in Bangkok that changed your perspective on something. Instead of saying, "I'm well-read," you naturally weave literary references or philosophical concepts into your conversation when they're relevant. The key is that these implications should flow naturally from who you are, not be forced or calculated. Another advanced concept I want to share is what I call the art of productive silence. Most men are terrified of silence in conversations, especially with women they're attracted to. They feel compelled to fill every moment with words, often saying things that diminish their attractiveness just to avoid a moment of quiet. But silence, when used correctly, is one of your most powerful tools. It creates space for tension, for her to invest in the conversation, and for genuine moments of connection that transcend words. I learned this lesson powerfully during a date at a quiet wine bar. We'd been having an amazing conversation about art, travel, and philosophy. Then there was a natural pause, and instead of rushing to fill it, I simply held her gaze and smiled slightly. The silence stretched for maybe 10 seconds, which feels like eternity when you're not used to it. But in that silence, more was communicated than in the previous hour of conversation. Later, she told me that was the moment she felt truly seen and when the attraction shifted from interest to something deeper. Now, let's address the digital age element of creating lasting attraction: text messaging and social media. These tools can either amplify your attractiveness or completely destroy it, depending on how you use them. The biggest mistake men make is treating texting like a conversation. They try to build attraction through text, sending long messages, responding immediately, and essentially giving away all their mystery through a screen. But masters of attraction understand that texting is simply a tool for arranging real-world interactions and occasionally sparking curiosity. Your text game should follow the same principles we've discussed. Be engaging but not overwhelming, mysterious but not distant, confident but not arrogant. Keep messages relatively short and purposeful. If she sends you a paragraph, you don't need to match it. Respond to the essence of what she's saying without feeling obligated to address every point. Use voice notes occasionally. They're more personal and allow your tonality to convey confidence and warmth that text can't capture. But most importantly, don't live in the digital realm. Use it as a bridge to real interaction, not a replacement for it. Let me tell you about a concept that completely changed my understanding of attraction: the difference between tension and pressure. Tension is attractive, pressure is repulsive. Tension is the electricity in the air when you're standing close but not touching, when you're holding eye contact a moment longer than necessary, when there's something unspoken hanging between you. Pressure is when you're pushing for a specific outcome, when she feels like you need something from her, when your energy is leaning forward desperately, rather than drawing her in magnetically. Creating tension requires what I call energetic pullback. Even when you're interested, even when you're engaged, there's a part of you that remains slightly reserved, that she has to work to fully access. This isn't about being cold or distant. You can be warm, engaging, and present while still maintaining this energetic boundary. It's the difference between a fire that someone has to move closer to for warmth versus a fire that's chasing them around, trying to burn them. You want to be the former, warm, inviting, but stationary in your frame. Understanding feminine psychology also means recognizing that women often fall in love through their ears while men fall in love through their eyes. This doesn't mean you need to become a poet, but it does mean that your words carry tremendous power. The way you describe experiences, the way you articulate your thoughts, the stories you tell. These create the mental and emotional landscape where attraction flourishes. When you can paint pictures with words, when you can take her on emotional journeys through your storytelling, when you can articulate feelings and experiences that she's felt but never been able to express, you create a connection that goes far beyond physical attraction. I want to share something that took me years to fully understand: the power of what I call selective investment. This is the art of investing your time, energy, and attention in a way that demonstrates high value while creating emotional investment from her. The key word is selective. You don't invest in every woman who shows you attention. You don't invest equally in someone you just met versus someone who's earned your interest over time. And most importantly, your investment should always be calibrated slightly below hers, especially in the beginning. This selective investment creates what psychologists call effort justification. The more effort someone puts into something, the more they value it. By being selective with your investment, you naturally inspire her to invest more in gaining your attention and affection. This creates a positive cycle where her increasing investment makes her value the connection more, which makes her invest even more. But this only works if you're genuinely a man worth investing in, which brings us back to the fundamental importance of building an interesting, fulfilling life independent of any woman. Now let's talk about sexual tension, because this is where many men completely drop the ball. They either ignore sexuality entirely, trying to friend their way into attraction, or they're overly sexual from the start, coming across as desperate or creepy. The key to building sexual tension that makes her fantasize about you is to acknowledge the sexual dynamic without being enslaved by it. You're a sexual being, she's a sexual being, and there's potential sexual energy between you. But you're not desperate for that energy to manifest in any particular way or timeline. This might show up as strong eye contact that acknowledges attraction without being needy. It might be a light touch on her lower back as you guide her through a door, confident and protective without being grabby. It might be a comment that has subtle sexual undertones delivered with a smile that shows you're comfortable with sexuality without being crude. The key is that sexuality is integrated into your overall presence, rather than being either hidden completely or made the focal point of every interaction. As we near the end of this deep dive into creating lasting attraction, I want to leave you with what I consider the meta principle that underlies everything we've discussed, the concept of authentic edge. This is about finding the sweet spot between being true to yourself and pushing the boundaries of your comfort zone. It's not about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming the fullest expression of who you are. It's about taking your natural personality and interests and expressing them with more confidence, more skill, more intentionality than you have before. The journey to becoming this man isn't always easy. It requires looking honestly at yourself, pushing past comfort zones, developing new skills, and sometimes facing rejection or failure. But every step on this journey makes you more attractive, not just to women, but to life itself. You become someone who can create and appreciate beauty, depth, and connection wherever you go. And that ultimately is what makes you the kind of man women can't stop thinking about. Not because you've mastered some system, but because you've mastered yourself. When you embody these principles rather than just understanding them intellectually, you don't just make one woman fantasize about you. You become the kind of man who leaves a lasting impression wherever he goes, whose presence is remembered and missed, who creates those rare moments of genuine connection that people carry with them long after you've parted ways.